Now we have the first of a series of urgent, short, direct addresses, what we're calling first persons at the conference. And for the first of these, we're delighted to have Mohammed Rabbani, International Director of CIJ, who's going to talk about the insidious development of Schedule 7 powers to stop and search and hold people at airports, train stations, and the UK's border surveillance. Something which is affecting lots of journalists, including some journalists I know. It's also affected David Miranda, who's the partner of Glenn Greenwald, who you'll hear from shortly. And it affected Mohammed Rabbani when he got a pull on the way through Heathrow. So, Mohammed.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, CIJ, for inviting me here to just share some of my experiences. Thank you to you all for joining us this morning. So my name is Mohammed Rabbani. I thought this is a good way to introduce myself. Me at the police station under arrest, connected to the incident that was just described. I was returning from an investigation trip from Doha. And before I explain exactly what happened, what I'd like to do is just check here. Does everyone possess a smartphone? I'm guessing you all do, all right? Laptop, smartphone, and I'm going to assume that you all have a password, okay? Anyone doesn't have a password on their phones? Okay, 1 or 2 people don't have passwords, and that's totally your right. But those who do have passwords, you've got it there for one simple reason, which is privacy. Now, if you're a journalist or a researcher or an academic, and you're coming back home, imagine you're stopped at the borders by the police who are there, and not only are you asked questions, but you're taken into a room, and you can be held there for up to 6 hours. Your devices can be taken off you. Your DNA can be taken off you. You can be fingerprinted. You do not have automatically the right to see a lawyer, although that can be exercised later on. And if you're asked to give your password, who would give it? Hands up, any brave people who'd admit they give their password at that point. All right, you wouldn't, because that's what you expect. Why should I give my password, especially if you're not being suspected of any wrongdoing? So that's exactly what I found myself in. Now, let me ask another question. If you're asked for your password and you're also threatened that if you do not hand over your password, you could end up in prison for 3 months, would you give your passwords? Okay. I hope the answer would be no. That was exactly what I decided at that point. It was about 2 years ago. I landed from Doha, Heathrow Airport, and the police, after questioning me, took my devices, and they asked me, give us your passwords. And I explained to the police officers, I cannot surrender your passwords, my passwords to you, because I have in my possession confidential information, in particular related to a torture survivor. If you allow me to get consent from that person and the very many other people that my organization supports, then I'll happily give my passwords. But of course, the police refused to do that. And the reason they gave was a reason that I'm familiar with, because unfortunately, this wasn't the first time that I was stopped. This was probably the 20th time that I'd been stopped coming back home from abroad, and coming back from all sorts of locations, from Spain, from Italy, from Turkey, from Morocco, from Germany, from all sorts of places. It doesn't matter where. So at the point when I refused, I was arrested. Under Schedule 7 to the Terrorism Act 2000, the government passed laws that are very broad. They impact on anyone who has a concern for protecting confidential data. These powers can land you in prison if you break any of the obligations upon you. One of which is you have no right to remain silent. Okay? you have no right to actually say no comment or defer an answer. You must answer every question that is posed to you. And as I found out later on, I ended up being charged for the offense. I ended up in court, and in court, I protested. I explained that I did what any other journalist, doctor, accountant, psychiatrist, anyone who has been entrusted with private and confidential data would have done, which is to protect the people and the information that's been entrusted to them. I said I did what anybody else would have done. A lawyer, for example, would have done the same. But now I'm being criminalized and found guilty. The judge in the end confirmed that I was in possession of confidential and sensitive data, confirmed that I was a person of good conduct and character, confirmed that my organization does important investigation into torture and other things, but then proceeded to find me guilty. So I ended up a convicted terrorist, okay? So I do address you here today as a convicted terrorist, which is one of the bizarre things. This is the man who had entrusted me with huge amounts of papers and other files. He was a person who had been detained in the early days after the 9/11 attacks. And he was held without due process rights for more than 2 years. He was disappeared. He was then later tortured, according to his testimony and documents that we've seen, by FBI agents. One incident involved putting socks into his mouth, almost to the point of him choking and dying. Once he entrusted us with this information, as I mentioned, I'd been stopped previously coming back into the UK. The police have taken my devices in the past. They've asked for my password, and I actually refused. On those occasions, it didn't lead to an arrest. On this occasion, when I had returned just from seeing and interviewing this person, and while in possession of the documents he gave me, I was actually straight away, the only thing that the police officer wanted was my device and my passwords. Now, I don't want to imagine there is a conspiracy, but the conspiracy thought started to occur to me, that how come they are interested in this, and did they know that I was carrying this data, and what could this then lead to? Now, we have to back up just a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. He was arrested after 9/11, all those years ago. The 9/11 attacks changed the world that we live in. And the fight against global terrorism, as it's called, caused fear, caused anxiety. And what states ended up doing was acquiring powers for themselves and taking those powers away from citizens. And we basically sleepwalked into a period, an era of exceptional powers and laws. Okay? We ended up basically creating a surveillance society at a scale that has not been seen before, impacting all ordinary people. I'll just share with you in the last few minutes some experiences of being part of a team that is trying to counter some of the impacts of surveillance society. Our work is about upholding due process and protecting the rule of law, which is something enshrined in the Magna Carta from 800 years ago. In 2013, we published a report. Our work began in 2003, but it was in 2013 that we actually began to face the heat and brunt from the British state. And it was because we published a report that deconstructed the PREVENT policy. That began a series of unfortunate events. And I'll quickly run through them very quickly. Muazzam Beg, who's one of our most well-known personalities, had his passport removed after coming back from a trip to South Africa. He was then found himself being charged on some terrorist offenses. He was held in prison for 7-8 months and then released as an innocent man. Soon after, our bank accounts were shut down. CIJ operates up till now, 4 years on, without any bank accounts. We operate simply on cash. One of our accountants who had held some of our money ended up being in a meeting where MI5 were present, and who were instructing the bank not to allow our accountant to handle any money for us. We went on to then, we just continued our work. We went on to, in the interest of in the public interest, we published all the information that we had on a man called Mohammed Rabbani, who we had advised 4 years prior to him going to Syria. We published all the emails because we felt it's the right of the British public to know this. This then escalated things. 2 of our funders were then contacted by the Charity Commission. They stopped funding us. We decided to take the matter to court, and in the end, we managed to secure a victory. But in the process of the court case, we discovered that there was actually suggestions from American intelligence to William Shawcross, who was the head of the Charity Commission at the time, to investigate those funders who were funding CIJ. The smearing program began across the British press. It was almost full spectrum. Various politicians started to specifically mention CIJ and attack it and condemn it. In fact, the Prime Minister singled us out. This is a leaderboard that we have in our office of all the staff members that have been stopped under Schedule 7, coming or going, coming back to Britain or leaving. We continue to do our work. And what I want to conclude on is simply, despite these pressures, despite these barriers and blockages, we've had still a large degree of success because we've remained independent. We've continued to investigate the crimes and abuses, especially the secrecy surrounding terrorism policy and counterterrorism laws. And I'll just leave by asking the question, I mean, is there a conspiracy? I'd like to believe there isn't a conspiracy. We are a very small organization of no more than 8 to 10 people, and we can't imagine that all of these various agencies are working in a concerted way to shut down this one tiny organization. But there is something going on, and we have had pushback from every single one of them. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening.